Under the original proposals of the infamous Beeching Report of 1963, the Isle of Wight was set to lose its entire railway network, and only fierce local opposition from grassroots to local authorities saved one line from closure. However, little did anyone know it at the time, but the Island Line wasn't to be the only railway on the island to survive. Another would eventually, from the ashes of almost nothing but the plucky spirit of local enthusiasts, a few old coaches, and an ancient steam locomotive, rise again and live on. Today, it's a perfect capture of what railway life used to look like on the island, and running alongside the Island Line, it's a match made in quaint heaven. Let's hop aboard and have an explore of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway. Hello people of the internet, welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to another station, another mile, and welcome back to the Isle of Wight. I'm still here, I haven't left. There's a very good reason why I'm still here. You see, on my video about the Island Line itself, there was one station that I kind of ignored, and that station is this one, Smallbrook Junction. And on first glance, you may think, well, there's probably a reason why you kind of ignored it. It's kind of like Lake Station. It's one wooden platform, and that's it. There is a shelter up there though, and some benches. There's actually places to sit on this station, so take that, Lake. But there is something much more interesting here. See this building behind me? That is actually a part of another railway line altogether. There's a reason why this station is known as Smallbrook Junction. This is where you can connect from the Island Line to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway. And I thought, since we're down here for these few days, let's go bash some steam trains as well. Let's go. Alright, so quick as a flash, I'm on the train. I'm on the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, being hauled along by a nice little austerity saddle tank who's doing a heckin' big chuff at the front of this rake of beautiful, beautiful old southern region, or southern railway I should say, compartment coaching stock. It's all compartment, so I've just gotten into a compartment to myself. Today's video is going to be particularly interesting. That's better for lighting, there we go. So today's video is going to be a little... The steam locomotive would like to say hello. Hello, steam loco. There you are. Doing a heckin' big chuff up there. But today's video is going to be a bit different to my normal heritage line type video, because normally I like to stop and explore every single station as thoroughly as I can and really go over it. But with current restrictions in place, and you know, with COVID-19 and everything else going on, you have to be booked for like one return trip on a specific train. So I believe at the line's headquarters at Haven Street Station, we will be able to have an explore. But at some of the intermediate stops, like the first few we're going to visit, not so much. We're going to have to just hop off and have a look around and then get back on. I'm going into this almost blind because I wasn't sure if I was going to do this and visit this railway line on this particular trip. So I'm going in knowing about as much of this line as some of you may be as well. Obviously, Editing Adam will know a lot more about this line than me, because he has something called the internet at his disposal and editing software at his disposal, so he could be all smug and know everything. But for now, I'm just gonna do a heckin' trundle and look around. It's charming. Oh, and we're in a tunnel. It's very dark. There we go, we're out again. See? There we go. I wasn't expecting that. So it's going to be that sort of trip today, folks. Hope you enjoyed the ride with me today. Let's go. You know something else I've got on my side? A whiteboard. So let's use that to take a look at the origins of this lovely little line, shall we? By 1880, the Isle of Wight had railway lines covering the entire length and breadth of the island, with over 50 miles of tracks providing passenger and, more importantly, freight links from the mainland to all parts of the island. One such line was the Ryde and Newport Railway, opened in 1875 to connect the port towns of Ryde in the northeast and Newport in the northwest, connecting in the process with other routes to Cowes, Sandown and Ventnor. The Ryde and Newport Railway connected to the Isle of Wight Railway, which is what we now know as the Island Line, at a junction at Smallbrook, in order to run trains into the Isle of Wight Railway's Ryde St John's Road station. Now remember that bit about Smallbrook Junction? It kind of becomes important later. In the meantime, with so many different companies building and running all these individual lines, organisation and finances were messy, and in 1887 a lot of these central routes, including the Ryde and Newport line, were amalgamated into the Isle of Wight Central Railway, before all of the island's lines came under the Southern Railway auspices in 1923. 40 years later, and an infamous report arrived on a desk in London advocating the closure of every line on the island. And while one line was saved, everything else was closed for good, including the Ryde and Newport route in 1966. Now that should have been the last we ever heard of this line. However, a small group of locals named the White Locomotive Society had other ideas. Using a base at the now abandoned Newport station and an old locomotive and some coaching stock purchased from British Railways, they were able to acquire 1.5 miles of track between Haven Street Station and the site of the old Wootton Station, with services resuming in earnest in 1971, just 5 years after the last service ran on the line. Since then, extension back east has been the main agenda, finally reconnecting to the Island Line at Smallbrook Junction in 1991, though this time not as a physical junction, but as a station interchange for passengers to change between the two lines with ease. And with the reopening of Ashley Station in 1993, this is how the Isle of Wight Steam Railway looks today. 5.5 miles of bucolic and thoroughly charming island history. Due to the nature of our ticket, the journey initially took us from the eastern end of the line all the way to the western end, passing through Haven Street for now, and taking us all the way to Wootton Station. And while the hecking little chuffy boy in charge of our train, War Department Austerity Tank Engine number 198 Royal Engineers, ran round our train, we had just enough time to step off and have a look around this quaint little station, opened in 1986 as a replacement for the original station closed in 1953. And it's worth keeping that in mind, because especially given the original Isle of Wight Central Railway era colour scheme, you could easily mistake it for an original station altogether. And trust me, that's a big compliment.
Okay, so we just made our first stop of our round trip today at Wootton, and we didn't have much time there, as you can tell by the fact that the train's already left again. And I had to make sure I was on it. There was no waiting for the next one today. I had just enough time to have a little look around Wootton, and I found quite an interesting little station. You see, Wootton is sort of like some of the stations on the East Lancashire Railway, I suppose, in that it's not quite the original station, it's a recreation of such, and it's actually built on a slightly different site. So you've got a fairly basic platform, lovely period signal box there, I'm a big fan of that, and the little booking office and everything. It looks immaculate, it's got this lovely kind of cream and red colour scheme to everything. It's very, very nice. Now what's particularly interesting about Wootton Station is that this line never stopped at Wootton, as in, it never terminated there. The Isle of Wight Steam Railway currently does, but it used to continue on through Whittingham onwards up to Newport, which we mentioned on the Island Line, also the site of the Isle of Wight Festival. Most of that is gone now, but I believe there is a certain amount of track bed that could still be reused towards Whittingham at least. I think beyond that, too much has been built over. But for now, Wootton is the terminus of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, because confusingly, the HQ of the line at Haven Street's in the middle. So we've gone through Haven Street already, and now we're going back there. Again, it's a little bit confusing, folks. I'm still getting my head around it as well. And lights have completely changed. So now I'm in the darkness. Haven Street should be our next stop. Let's get going.
The two primary extension options for the railway at present are westbound to Whittingham, where enough old track bed is still extant, and back to the original eastern terminus at Ryde St John's Road. The latter entirely depends on platform and route availability on the Island Line itself. Those are for another day, though. For now, let's focus on the past and present of this line as we arrive at railway headquarters at Haven Street Station, the once humble through station where this entire heritage operation started just over 50 years ago.
Just like being back on a HST. Exactly the same. And now, folks, I come to you from a very peaceful and very, very serene Haven Street Station. This is actually the main headquarters of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, not Smallbrook Junction at one end of the line or Wootton at the other end. This is the main headquarters. It's again kind of like an East Lancashire Railway situation where Bury Bolton Street just happened to be in the middle of the line that they ended up getting preserved. This is where the Preservation Society set up camp back in 1971 when this place was first reopened as a heritage line, which wasn't that long after it was closed in the first place, which is a big achievement in itself. Also helps in terms of preserving a lot of the architecture and that. If you preserve something very quickly, less time for other people to smash it down and destroy it and build houses and stuff on it. So that's very useful. It's a lovely little station, I've got to say. I'm a big fan of this little line. I might have mentioned in my Island Line episode that the Island Line stock, it's not exactly what you call modern, but you might at least imagine. Look, it's an electric multi-unit. It's got to be more modern than steam locomotives. Steam locomotives, very old. Well, I have some news for you. Now, I knew for a fact coming in that at least 2 of the locomotives in the Isle of Wight Steam Railways collection were actually more modern than the 1938 stock, being the Ivert tank engines that were built in the early 1950s. What I didn't know is that they also have 4 War Department Hunslet Austerity saddle tank engine locomotives. They're also more modern because they were also built in the early 50s. How is it that the main line has older stock and feels like more of a heritage line than the actual heritage line? Why don't you just make the Island Line a heritage line? Come on, let's just do it. Anyway, that's an interesting little quirk. We have a heritage line here which actually has more modern stock than the main line network rail line that it connects to. I'm trying to think of where else that might be the case. I'm drawing a blank. I'm sure if any of you can correct me in the comments, go for it. I challenge you. I challenge you to find a situation elsewhere in the country than right here on the Isle of Wight where that's the case. Meantime, I've got a little bit of downtime before my final train back to Smallbrook Junction, so I'm going to take a look around. The sun's come back out and everything.
Haven Street encapsulates the entire Isle of Wight Steam Railway operation almost perfectly, not least of all because of its effortless blending of generations of history. The original station architecture survives alongside new buildings for a cafe, museum and locomotive works, and inside the latter is where the line's fleet of locomotives is looked after. A fleet that in itself spans the generations, from the modern traction already discussed, all the way back to original vintage tank locomotives who would have called the island home in their operational years. And really, isn't that the magic of heritage railways? What often starts as just a mission to scrape together enough resources to survive and to preserve as much as possible before it's destroyed and lost to time, ends up using those humble beginnings to flower into a fully fledged railway operation in its own right. One that crystallises the original spirit of the line from decades past, keeps the flame alive for generations to come, and even in many cases rebuilds back what couldn't be saved originally, or builds anew altogether to create new chapters in a line's legacy. And while I couldn't explore absolutely everything on my first trip to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, I saw more than enough to convince me that this little line ticks every box I could ever wish for from a heritage railway. And hey, any excuse to come back and visit again someday, right? For now though, our circular journey comes to an end back where it started, at Smallbrook Junction, a station built anew by the heritage line to make up for a junction connection that physically no longer exists, in the style of an original station on the line, and just by existing, it's created another piece of history. It is one of only 2 stations in the entirety of the British Isles to have no public access on foot and only exist to offer an interchange between 2 railway systems. What's the other one, you might ask? Manula Junction Station in Ireland. Because of course, should we expect anything less from the quirky Isle of Wight? I really don't think we should. So there it is, folks, in what feels like the blink of an eye. That's one complete round trip on the Isle of Wight Steam Railway. And we're right back to where we started, here at Smallbrook Junction. I really want to stay longer. Obviously, current COVID restrictions and operating procedures means that you can just have book one return trip on the line at a time. And I like to think I absolutely more than got my money's worth, I've got to say. But what a charming little railway. In the meantime, it's probably about time I head back to the mainland and home. So, thank you guys so much for watching and joining me on my Isle of Wight Odyssey on the Island Line and the Isle of Wight Steam Railway. And until we meet again, friends, I will see you guys soon on another station, another mile.